Welcome to the latest edition of the OmniTalk Spotlight Series, the series that highlights the people, the companies, and the technologies that are shaping the future of retail. I'm your host, Chris Walton.
And I'm Mezzenga.
And today we are turning our attention to a subject that likely isn't talked about near enough at retail executive cocktail parties. And I'm talking about the untold risks of last mile fulfillment. So joining us today to share her considerable expertise on this subject is Openforce's CEO, Wendy Greenland. Wendy is a seasoned technology leader driving innovation in modern labor markets. She has expertise in technology leadership and transportation. She bridges the gap between companies and independent contractors, positioning Openforce as a front runner in the technology labor landscape. So get ready to be inspired with her insights on technology, independent contractors, and the future of retail delivery. Welcome, Wendy, to the show.
Thank you, Chris. It's very nice to be here. I appreciate the time.
Quite the intro, Wendy. My goodness.
I know that's the most I've ever done.
I don't know how to measure up to all of that, but I'll try.
Yeah.
I know it's a tough one to live up to, but I'm pretty excited about this show.
Yeah, Wendy, I don't know. I mean, Chris kind of gave you the red carpet of introductions, but I would like to know from your perspective a little bit about your background. If you can just help the audience get to know a little bit more about you to start the conversation off.
Absolutely. Happy to do that. So Wendy Greenland, CEO of Openforce. I started my career years ago in technology. I was a technology trainer early in my career with Sprint. And we started working on CDMA, old technology that'll age me a little, and moved into telecommunications and spent a lot of time in telecommunications. And then in 2014, I really wanted to move over to the software side of technology. And I had owned a business for 12 years. I finally very successfully exited that business. And then I had to make a decision on what I wanted to do next. And I started on with a company called Infinity HR. It was an HRIS and payroll integrator, and more on the W-2 side of the human capital management market, and worked there for about 4 years. And when that was acquired by Providence Equity, we rebranded into a company named Arcoro, and that was in 2018. In 2019, I started looking for a new opportunity, and Riverside Partners, were private equity owned, reached out to me for a COO position at Openforce. And I loved the concept because I had been on the W-2 side of software, payroll, all the things that we do, but this is on the 1099 side. And it's very specifically 1099 risk mitigation, compliance, insurance and payments for 1099 contractors. And I loved the concept because they're entrepreneurial and they're all trying to start a small business. And so I could leverage my technology and software skills in W-2 and turn around and really start to hone in on the 1099 market, which is a niche market within the human capital management industry. And so I started on with them in 2019 as COO, and then right in the middle of the pandemic, I was promoted to an appointed CEO of Openforce in mid 2020.
Wendy, I'm curious, just before we get into
I think I have some questions.
Yeah. What to you, especially in the last 3 years, what is the audience listening not thinking about when you take into account the complexities of being in the situation of 1099 and W-2 employees? There's so much to it that I feel like what are we missing? What's the big thing that people should be paying more attention to that maybe they aren't?
Well, that is the question of the century, really, because the 1099 worker, the entrepreneur, the freelancer, the contingent worker is growing exponentially, and by 2027. We're looking at more than 50% of the workforce will be independent worker, will be freelance or contingent. So it's more than 65 million ICs or independent contractors in this country doing all sorts of work, professional and freelance and other things. So 65 million people out there doing this work. What happened during the last 3 years in the pandemic is that e-commerce last mile delivery, first and last mile delivery all just grew exponentially through the pandemic. Suddenly your laggards who were, I'm not ordering groceries on an app and having it delivered. That's crazy. I go to the grocery store and I get my toilet paper. Well, when you couldn't get it, you had to have it delivered. And suddenly everybody was now, oh, this is easier. Oh, I don't mind paying a delivery fee. I love this. This goes right to my house. And so you end up having during the last 3 years, we had this demand for more drivers and more drivers in the e-commerce space. And of course, then you have workers who are kind of sitting up and saying, oh, I want the flexibility. I want a higher earning, but I can be my own boss. This is great. Right. I don't have benefits, but maybe I could figure out a way around that. And how do I get paid? And what do I need to do? And, a few clicks on an app on their phone and they're off and running, delivering, and they think it's going to be fantastic. They're going to be delivering. Many of the retailers are using 3PL, third-party logistics companies, and those companies are very often using independent contract workforces. So if those independent contractors, and here's really the crux of the problem, don't understand what it truly means to be a small business and to have the insurances they need in place and to make sure that they're covering those expenses properly, they're filing their taxes properly, now all of a sudden you've got challenges, and those challenges can lead to all sorts of problems, including something called misclassification. And I don't know if you want to really dig into that.
Yeah, no, please.
Sorry, this is exciting.
And open up Pandora's box here, Wendy. So
yeah, let me explain a little bit more about misclassification. So when you're a W-2 employee, the employer that you work for can provide both direction and control. They can tell you when you have to be somewhere. They can tell you to wear a shirt. They can tell you when to have something delivered. And in addition to that, you end up with benefits. You end up with, the medical, dental, and whatever the state requires for the benefits needed in order to be a W-2 employee, right? And there's really only two classifications of workers, W-2 or 1099, and 1099 has its own set of requirements. And based on the legislative landscape of this country, part of it depends on which state you reside in, but each state has its own classification test that determines whether or not that worker should be classified as an independent worker or a W-2 worker. And if you fail the test, then you have to pay back taxes on that independent worker. And if you fail the test, then you have officially misclassified that worker as a 1099 when they should have been classified as a W-2 employee. So that right there is the crux of the problem. Because if that worker is not treated like an independent worker properly, then all of the good intentions that went into that initial contract and relationship go out the window, because you've got an auditor or the IRS, or you've got the state, federal, and local agencies coming in and saying, nope, that should have been a W-2 employee. You owe benefits, you owe back taxes. And if you have a large workforce, if you have, let's say, it's not a big deal if it's one or two, but if you have 100 independent contractors or 500 independent contractors, and now you have to pay, let's say, 1,000 independent contractors back taxes, now you're talking about multi-million-dollar legislative battles that are going on, legal battles that are going on across the nation.
Right. So, and that's exactly why that's why we were so intrigued to talk to you too, because I mean, the pandemic's one thing, but e-commerce has been growing by leaps and bounds forever. And so the net of what you're saying to us is really like, you've got more people wanting to be a part of this workforce because of the flexibility, because of the income potential that it provides to certain part of the population too. But like what I'm taking away from you is that, yeah, that's great, but it's adding a ton of complexity and burden to the businesses that are supplying that workforce and the retailers that are contracting with that workforce as well. So I'd love to hear now, like, what are some of the risks that come with those complexities, and what is it that you do at Openforce to help, help retailers and others solve those issues?
So in the life cycle of an independent worker, there's a number of things that go on that need to be properly vetted, properly determined whether or not this worker is ready to work, whether they are compliant, whether they have a clean background check and a drug screen, a motor vehicle record. Do they have the proper insurance? These are all vetting pieces that go on in the relationship with that independent contractor. And then finally, you get to a point where you get them on the road. They're out driving for your business, and then you pay them. And as you pay them, there are other things that begin to pop up, like they want medical benefits or they want cash advance so they can fuel in their vehicle. So you have all of these pieces that are going on in this relationship. And what we do is we work with any company that works with 1099 workers, and we determine what are the contract requirements. And the contract requirements are usually set by an agreement between them and a retailer. So the retailer will help determine what the contract requirements are. And then we take those contract requirements, and then Openforce steps in and separates out direction and control. And that way we're the ones saying to the independent worker, all right, in order to meet the terms of this contract, you have to have a motor vehicle record, a background check, a drug screen. It needs to be this kind of drug screen. If you're delivering labs, you have to have a bloodborne pathogen certification. You have to have a HIPAA certification. These are the things you have to have, right, in order to deliver this for this contract. And as they go through, we offer all of those pieces in the workflow. And because they're independent workers and they're independent businesses, we say, you have it, just upload it, and we'll keep it in your document vault. So we have clean compliance, right? If you don't, that's where we come in and say, okay, well, here's some insurances that you need. So for this particular contract, you need to have occupational accident insurance, which we should have a conversation about that. That's critically important in this, because that is the work comp equivalent to a W-2 worker. But if you have uploaded, if you don't, here's some options for you. And so we work with a lot of insurance partners to get them what they need. And then once they get on the road, then we pay them.
And Wendy, is that for the associate then? Like, say I'm a 1099 worker and I work for DoorDash and I work for Uber. Are you carrying that information then, that saved content for me, so that when I'm registering as a provider for each of these services, I can pass that along? Or is it not to that level yet?
So it can be used that way, yes. One of the things that is a challenge in this particular industry is the insurance providers want to see who they're connected with before they'll determine whether they want to issue, because they have loss run safety. There are a number of things that the insurance providers want to see. So the insurance does get a little bit complicated, but we can allow them to, especially within our ecosystem, then it's much easier. They can pop around and do work for multiple companies.
This seems so factorially complex.
Yes.
I like the factorial nature of this is insane to me.
Well, and even like the state by state stuff too. Like, I know we just had a change in Minnesota to our law as it pertains to 1099 and W-2 employees like yesterday. So Wendy, I imagine like you're keeping track of that on the retailer or company's behalf then as well, to make sure that it's updated.
Yes, absolutely. We keep track of DOT, Motor Carrier Authority, any requirements that the retailer may have for them, whether it's compliance, whether it's authorities, Motor Carrier Authority, all of those pieces, and then the insurances are all in the document vault. And so the retailer would then know with a surety that those drivers are compliant. And then our system is constantly updating and sending out expiration notices. For example, if something gets expired, hey, you're getting ready to expire. Your driver's license is expiring. Those kinds of things. Which it's impossible to manage that.
Yeah, no, on top of you don't even have the resources as a retailer, I imagine, to stay on top of things like this. Like,
no, this gets insane pretty quickly. And the other part too, Wendy, that I want to ask you, because I think it probably also gets a little bit scary too. I mean, you kind of alluded to some of the issues a few minutes ago, but like some of the issues that the retailers and the delivery companies face if they don't handle it in this manner get pretty real pretty quickly. And I don't want to scare the audience, but I think it's important that we talk about what those are too. So what are some of those things when this goes awry?
When this goes awry, DoorDash just got $100 million judgment. Instacart got a $46 million settlement with the city of San Diego. We had
one city
retailer, just a parts store here in Arizona, $5.6 million settlement. So these are some pretty big dollars that are going around. But beyond that, you're also talking about risk related to like nuclear verdicts. So in insurance, what's a nuclear verdict?
Yeah, I was going to say, you got to break that one down for me, Wendy.
So insurance, if there's and I'll give you an example without using names, people probably can look it up, but when you're driving a box truck, for example, right, and you've ordered a refrigerator or a couch or what have you, that box truck drives up to your home and they're getting ready to move that, and they're going to cross the threshold into your home. That requires a level of compliance, making sure that there's a drug screen and a clean driving record, and once they go into the home, a level of insurance to cover if they damage something, like they're hooking up a dishwasher and they miss something because maybe they're doing the assembly or the installation as well, and now all of a sudden they've flooded your home, and did they have the right general liability insurance? Do they have the cargo insurance in case there's an accident on the way? Do they have commercial auto insurance? And this is the riskier part. What happens if they invited their friend onto the truck for the day to help them deliver that refrigerator, and the retailer doesn't even know who that person is, and the friend isn't compliant? The friend who's helping them for the day, they brought them onto the truck. No background check, no drug screen, no MVR.
That happened to me.
Really?
Yeah. Remember with Comcast, I had there was a guy who just brought his friend in to do the install because he was working with him that day. I mean, it sounds crazy, but what Wendy's talking about has happened.
Yeah, it gives me a whole nother perspective on who am I contracting to bring into my house too, and how much insurance do they have, and how do I validate that too? But that's a whole nother story, Wendy. But no, sorry, keep going.
No, and there was a situation in Florida where a contractor had a box truck. They brought somebody in. They didn't have neither the third-party logistics company or the retailer had visibility into who that sub was. We call them subcontractors. Who that subcontractor was. And he killed the homeowner, the subcontractor did. Because he just invited, he didn't even know who he was. He just invited him to help him for the day. And he was trying to figure out what the problem was with the delivery. He was on with his dispatcher, and the subcontractor meanwhile was in the house, and he killed the sub. So so talk about fear. These are the kinds of things that are going on, that without visibility into these contractors and subcontractors and making sure they're compliant, especially when they're supposed to be independent. They're supposed to be a small business, and we want to give them that entrepreneurial opportunity, but they also don't always understand that there are legal and insurance requirements and compliance requirements. So that's where Openforce kind of steps in, and we say, okay, if you want to do this, here are the requirements. We have it set up in the system, and then we keep all of that data so that we know what's expiring, we know what's there, and make sure they have the insurances they need.
Oh, so man. Well, if the retailers and brands listening to this don't take something away from what Wendy just described, you gotta get this in order.
This is the first time I think murder's ever been discussed.
I know,
on this podcast,
I know,
actually.
but
So
it's
just serious.
Yes.
It's serious.
No,
not to make light of it at all.
No, don't be sorry. I think it's important for everybody to understand just the magnitude of which we're talking right now. Wendy, prevention is obviously a significant part of this discussion. But what other benefits are there from retailers to engaging with a platform like Openforce?
So prevention is key for sure. And if I were a retailer listening today, what I would be thinking is, how do I make sure that the companies I'm using to deliver the goods for my business are compliant? I would make sure that they're using a company like Openforce, a third party that gives visibility to all of those things. If that becomes a gold standard, and they say, this is because I don't want that to happen to me, so you have to use a company like this. Here are some options for you. But if if the third-party logistics company is trying to do this all in-house in order to save money, because, honestly, margins are very tight.
You're right.
They're trying to do more with less. The inflationary pressures that everybody's feeling. There's been a bit of a flattening in deliveries in the first quarter of this year. So people are trying to do so much more with less. Well, that puts the retailers at even more risk, right? Because then they're cutting corners, and where they cut corners oftentimes is in insurance and making sure that they have the right compliance items. So where Openforce steps in is to say, any of your 3PLs that work with us, we will make sure that they have those items, and the risk begins to drop because there's visibility, at least, into all of these players. And even the subcontractors, the insurances we provide really drive adoption of these insurances. So these master contractors that work with these subs that I'm talking about are motivated and happy to give visibility to them because it saves them money.
Yeah, it makes sense too. And the retailers listening too, the retailers also have the power to help drive this adoption across the delivery network, so that the end consumer ultimately is the one that's protected from the things that we're talking about, which is an important part. So to that point, Wendy, I'm curious, like, what does an implementation look like on the retailer side? Like how easy is it? What's all involved there?
So the retailer has a contract, usually, not always, but usually with some sort of third-party logistics company that is actually working with the independent contractors. So simply, the retailer could say, if you are going to be working with us, you must use
That's that easy, huh?
And we'll take care of the rest with the third-party logistics companies that are actually doing the deliveries.
It's so interesting to me too, because I remember, Chris, like early on, especially during the pandemic, when we saw a lot of retailers fluctuating like back and forth between taking third party internal or like deliveries internally versus working with third party. And now it's so, I mean, this has been such an eye-opening conversation to just how much complexity is involved with managing those employees to be doing this. And it just seems almost impossible to me.
Well, no, one thing that everyone always says about the industry, it's a very local level industry, right? It's the wild west out there. I mean, I got things thinking about Walmart doing in-home deliveries to the fridge and stuff like that. Like that starts to come into play here. There's all these new aspects coming out of everything over the last 3 or 4 years, which gets me to my last question, Wendy, that I want to ask you too, is there's been a lot of talk around EVs, particularly as well, electric vehicle adoption. I'm going to be talking about this at Home Delivery World as well with a panel of people. I'm curious, how does that focus on the continued evolution or the adoption of electric vehicles? How does that complicate things? Does it add any complexities to this whole discussion, or is that am I thinking about too much about that?
No, it adds a lot of complexity. So if you're a retailer and you're using a third-party logistics company, now you as the retailer have a 3-pronged plan for sustainability that you have to deliver to the federal government. Then these retailers are working with the third-party logistics company. They're working with independent contractors who are independent businesses. They cannot tell them what to do. They cannot tell them they have to get an EV vehicle because they're more expensive. They can tell them it has to be delivered to this location by this time. Can you meet the terms of the contract? Yes or no? That is all they can say. They cannot say how to do it. They cannot say you have to use an EV vehicle. They cannot say you need to have 3 people on the truck with you. They can only say this by this time, yes or no, can you meet the terms? Otherwise, it starts to look employee-like. Right? Because now they're telling them what to do, and that now the lines get blurred and they end up with a misclass lawsuit or claim. So with EV vehicles, the only way to do that is through something like Openforce. And we do have a program right now. Actually, come to our session because we're doing a co-branded session with Fluid Trucks at Home Delivery World on this. So on our benefits portal, where we're working directly with the independent contractor, small business, you need a leasing program, we have options for you. You need medical insurance or dental insurance, we have options for you. Well, one of them is a leasing program through Fluid Trucks. And on that program, if they choose an EV vehicle, we have a retailer that's working with us to give them a code for some sort of subsidy so that they can take advantage of this sustainability program from the retailer's perspective. And it comes through Openforce. So it's between us, the retailer, and Fluid Trucks on the benefits portal. The 3PL who's at risk of misclassification, if they make them do it or talk to them about it, they don't get involved at all. It just goes straight through us. They can get on our portal. They can select a truck. It can be an EV vehicle, but because they're an independent business, this is a choice that they're making, and we're motivating them with the subsidy from the retailer.
Well, Wendy, how does that work then with like Target, Walmart, these retailers who have a zero carbon footprint plan by 2040? Like, how does that work then if you can't say your third-party drivers have to drive EV vehicles? Because I imagine that that's going to have to happen at some point in time. Like, how do you see that changing?
Without legislation, the direction the states, especially some of the more litigious states, are going is to drive more misclassification, which puts them more at risk for doing that. Sure. So the only way to do that is to come up with other ways to meet the sustainability requirements, which some of them are trying to do that as an organization. But if they want the independent contractors to do that, then you have to do it through a third party. There's no way that independent contractor needs to be incentivized in another way to pick that up and want to do that.
Yes.
If I'm barely making it and I can barely even put fuel in my vehicle between now and Friday, you want me to go ahead and buy an EV vehicle? They're just not going to do it without an incentive. And so that's what this program we're rolling out at Home Delivery World is really addressing.
It's really interesting. That's the second time in 2 days Fluid Trucks came up in the conversation around this topic too. So it makes me think differently about that business model as well. Wow. Well,
Wendy, let's wrap things up here. I'm curious, we talked about EV and how that's going to impact this industry, but what else are you excited about as CEO, and what are your kind of priorities to close out the year here at Openforce?
So we are doing a lot of work on really promoting and changing the way our benefits for independent contractors are rolling out, what we're offering, the insurances that we're offering. We have a number of new partners we're working with. The more the insurance partners start to this conversation, the more they start to go, wait, what do you do? Oh, we want to get involved, because the insurance partners, they just want to sell insurance, but they don't want the risk of the compliance issues we just talked about. Mm-hmm. So how do I sell insurance to a population of people without putting the delivery company at risk of misclassification, and without myself getting pulled into one of those crazy lawsuits or nuclear verdicts that we've been talking about? So a lot of them are now pulling in and starting to say, how do we work with Openforce? So we have a partner-centric model for insurances. So we're trying to offer more and more options for insurances. We have a really cool New Wallander Dispatch commercial auto program for Sprinter vans and cars, which rides over a personal auto. So now you have an Instacart driver or a food delivery driver that can get actual commercial auto, but they don't have the big down payments. So my excitement right now is really around the partner and the insurances that we're offering and how we're facilitating those, and then the benefits that we're offering up. Between those two things, I think those are the key strategic initiatives that we have. The more we can help an independent contractor be an independent business successfully, provide them with the cash. I mean, if you own a business, what do you need, right? You need cash. You need insurance, and you kind of need help just getting started and understanding the tax implications and the contractual implications of that business. So we're doing a lot of work on the benefits side of what we do for our independent contract workforces to help them really with a small business toolkit that will make a difference for them long term.
Wow, that was great. I mean, you said in the beginning that you're kind of an HR wonk from your background, and man, it comes out through and through listening to you talk about this podcast and how you think about all this. So it was great. But I want to let people know too, for our loyal listeners, that if you happen to be at Home Delivery World, Wendy and I are actually going to be sitting down, and we're going to try to have this conversation again, but even more in depth across 40 minutes. We're also going to do Q&A, where I imagine I'm just going to ask Wendy a few questions and then sit back and then just open the floor to all the Q&A that's going to happen, because I imagine she's going to get a lot of great questions. But until then, and for those people that aren't going to be able to join us at the show, Wendy, if people want to learn more, get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, first of all, Home Delivery World's a great way to do that. We'll be at booth 834. So come by, see Openforce. I will be there off and on. You and I are having our sit down. We're also doing the presentation with Fluid Trucks that I mentioned there. And then my email address, wendy.greenland@oforce.com. And just go to oforce.com and you'll see that's our website. You'll see everything you need to know about what we're working on and the insurance I talked about and all of the other compliance related things that we're doing for independent contract workforces. And we're excited about what we're doing and thrilled to meet you in person.
Yeah, ditto. We are too. Yeah, that's where
I'm scared if I know we go up against each other at some point.
I know, right?
At Home Delivery World, Chris, and I think that you're going to win based on this conversation.
Wendy's going to be tough to beat. My panel beats your panel.
Yes,
and
I have no doubt.
better than your panel.
No doubt.
All right. Well, thanks, Wendy, so much. That wraps us up. Thanks to Wendy Greenland of Openforce for sitting down with us today. And thanks to all of you for listening, as always. And on behalf of all of us here at OmniTalk, we can never say it enough, especially in light of this podcast. Be careful out there.